All right, today we're going to finish the book When the Night Comes Falling by Howard Blum, and it has been a long and windy road through this book. It's been difficult. I know Howard Blum is not people's top list of authorities on the subject matter. However, he did have some really good pieces of information and some concluding thoughts that I find a bit shocking in a way in what they admit and confirm on things that I have felt and seen in my own investigation. And I would say investigation loosely. I'm not a private investigator. I don't beat down people's doors and look for that inside scoop. I pretty much cover things that other people have said and unearthed, and I have my own thoughts about them. That's the kind of journalism that I do at the moment. Now, I plan on getting a little deeper into those things coming up in the future. But right now, I spend a lot of time reviewing what has already been unearthed and then coming to my own conclusions from what has been unearthed. Perfect example of some shocking things that came out and were admitted to in Howard Blum's book. So in other words, I'm going to say that Howard Blum did some vetting to prove something that I have been kicked in the teeth about myself. There was a conversation between Steve Goncalves, allegedly, that took place with a YouTuber of a certain name, which I won't mention here. Those text messages between Steve Goncalves and this YouTuber have been leaked on the internet, and I have covered how I believe that they were legitimate. I got kicked in the teeth by some people saying, haven't you found that was completely discredited? That was not true at all whatsoever. Well, Howard Blum covers the same exact text messages, in my opinion, and came to some of the same conclusions that I did, only I had additional things, because I see things other people don't see. So Howard Blum, who has his biased opinion, and by the way, the most difficult part of today's chapter as we conclude the book When the Night Comes Falling is listening to Howard Blum tell you what he thinks happened that night, which I think is wrong, for the record, but I'm going to have to read it so that you understand what Howard Blum thinks happened and the motivations that he thinks are behind the killing, so that we can just hear it for him ourselves, what Howard Blum's ultimate conclusion about what happened that night is. However, before we get to the shitty ending of what Howard Blum thinks happened that night, I'm going to cover the shocking revelations that I feel Howard Blum admitted to, that I myself was like, that I think is legit. And he confirms that that probably was legit. And it's some big ones. So let's get into it. All right. So I'm going to pull up on the screen, hopefully. Part 6, Steve's story. Christy and Steve Goncalves, for them, justice for Kaylee meant that their daughter's killer would face a firing squad. Now, there are many people who believe, and it may actually be 100% true, that Steve Goncalves' only pissed off moment about the whole plea deal was that they didn't get to kill Brian Kohberger. That Steve Goncalves' ultimate desire is to make sure Brian Kohberger is killed for killing his daughter, and that's the only thing that will give him any kind of peace of mind. And that's what this is kind of hinting about here as well. Justice means that he will face the firing squad, and anything letting him off the hook for the firing squad is robbing the family of justice. I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, that Steve Goncalves believes that there are other people involved, and it's worse than just Kohberger getting off and not getting the fire squad. It's the injustice of the people who were also involved getting away with murder. That is my primary concern. It may not be Steve's, although I think you're going to see here that Steve believes that that's possible as well, in my opinion. And all I can say is, if Steve Goncalves doesn't hate the piss out of me for my channel and sees this and believes that there's other people, I hope to God he reaches out to me, because I'll work for free and we will find who else is responsible, because that is important to me. Now, if Steve is happy, and I know he's not happy with not putting Kohberger to death, but if he's happy that everyone involved in this has been paid their due just, then we'll let it go. But if he, like me, thinks that there are other people involved in this situation, I can't rest with that being left alone either. And I want justice to be served. So for what it's worth, let's get into some of those shocking details, if you will. Now, what was Steve Goncalves to make of all of this? If he allowed himself to simply be led by his broken heart, then he could sit back, breathe the comfort sigh of relief, and rejoice that the authorities had gotten their man. This is talking about how early Steve Goncalves had the attitude of, I'm not going to just sit by and let somebody tell me what happened. I need to know for myself. This is where I say I have always resonated with Steve Goncalves. I, like him, can't just fucking sit back and let somebody tell me what happened. I need to know for myself, and I need to know and put that to bed. All of my fears, all of my questions, all of that I need to be at peace with. So I feel like that's something I have resonated with Steve. Steve did not want to just sit around on his ass waiting for the authorities to tell him what happened, especially if he had thoughts that maybe they were getting it wrong. I have thoughts that they have gotten it wrong, and I can't just live with the idea of, I'll just be happy when you guys just tell me at the end of the day what happened. And frankly, for America out there, for those of you who felt content to just let the authorities tell you what happened, it's a shame that you are not more like Steve, who I think wanted to find out what really happened and not just trust mainstream media and the authorities to tell him what happened. And that's where I'm at as well. All right. The arrest brought him neither a sense of resignation nor one of acceptance, and most certainly not calm. Instead, new nagging questions arose, and in their wake, new resentments flourished. Time to think, Steve was learning, was always dangerous. And again, what you're seeing is that Steve Goncalves didn't find peace that, oh, Kohberger's the guy, let's put him away and kill him. We've got it. It didn't sit right with him. It doesn't fucking sit right with me either. Pardon the French. It doesn't sit right with me either. All right. As he, Steve Goncalves, scoured the internet and discovered a rabble of often intriguing theories, he grew concerned. It was a world of startling new information. If he stood still, the case would simply pass him by. Now, I want to point out, by the way, that this book makes reference to somehow internet sleuths or despicable human beings who just make up shit. And yet Steve Goncalves is doing the same thing. He's looking and he's internet sleuthing. He's not just sitting by. He's trying to find out what happened. And he's engaging internet sleuths. He's engaging YouTubers like myself, perhaps, but I wasn't involved in the early stages for him to get involved with. And let's put that all aside. People like me, however, who are covering the story and coming up with great questions. Steve Goncalves, in my opinion, found value in that because he had the same questions. So while Howard Blum, who would like to say, I'm the respected author here, you need to listen to my opinion, I will write the book, all the rest of you need to shut the hell up. Only a respected journalist can cover this thing, and that's me. Everybody else is just spinning wheels. It's okay for Steve Goncalves a little bit to do some internet sleuthing, but everybody else, we're horrible human beings. Rant over. Let's move on. All right. His often shared doubts about the competence of police. So Steve Goncalves believes the police could be incompetent. I also believe the police could be incompetent. Police incompetence has been a part of almost every case that I choose to look into. Anyways, they're half measures and failures. Yes, law enforcement half does the job a lot of times. Once they have decided who they want, they stop looking at anything else. They become narrow focused. This, again, is the primary problem that I have. All of you people out there in America are like, well, Kohberger's the guy we know because they focused on him like a laser beam and got him. Yes, they become narrow-sighted. Once they've decided who's involved, that's the end of that story. And again, if Brian Kohberger was only one of several individuals, shame on you, America, if you feel like it's okay for you to put one guy away and let all the rest of the perpetrators, all the other accomplices, everybody else who might have been involved, just walk scot-free and be praised somehow they're heroes because they got one guy. And let's just narrow our focus on one guy and ignore everybody else that might have been involved. Shame on you if that's your attitude, and that's my view on that matter. All right. So all his old suspicions, because Steve Goncalves was suspicious right from the very beginning that law enforcement too early ruled people out on this investigation. Way early. He said, I think they too quickly ruled people out. And so those suspicions, as we get to the close of this book, are starting to resurface. All his old suspicions had broken loose and risen up in him once more. And to do nothing would be a betrayal of his steely vow. I'm telling you right now, we're coming for you. He had vowed as a father to get to the bottom of what happened, which to me means, and maybe I'm overinterpreting this, Steve Goncalves is not content to sit by and have law enforcement and mainstream media tell him what happened to his daughter. He needs to know for himself. I want to know for myself. And again, those of you who are content to just wait, who keep telling me, devil's advocates, just wait until the trial is over and then they'll tell you what happened. No, Steve and I, and again, I shouldn't say Steve and I, because Steve probably would tell me to go pack sand and punch me in the mouth, because I'm sure there's something I've said he doesn't like. But I view myself as a lot more like Steve Goncalves than mainstream media morons, as a famous person says. I hate that I just quoted that guy. Not that I hate that I quoted him, but I hate that it sounds like I just try to rip him off. It just slipped out. I've watched a lot of his videos. So when I hear about mainstream media morons, you know who I'm talking about. And again, I'm not trying to be insulting to the guy. I just hear it so many times. It just slipped out of my mouth. All right. Anyways, I don't want to sit there and wait for mainstream media to tell me what happened or law enforcement to tell me what happened. And I feel like neither does Steve. Now, it wasn't simply vanity, the belief that one middle-aged guy, that's Steve Goncalves talking about himself, with only a background in IT could get to the bottom of things. So again, Steve Goncalves is like, hey, you know, look, maybe I'm being vain. How am I, just an IT guy, going to break this case that all the feds are on, law enforcement is on? I have the same self-doubts about myself. Who am I? I'm just a fucking, I'm an IT guy as well. My background lately is in IT. So I am also, now I'm an old fart IT, and I'm thinking, who am I? Am I going to break the case that the feds can't break? Am I going to come up with something? Or Steve Goncalves is having those same kind of doubts. Again, every step of the way, this is why I resonate with Steve Goncalves. I feel I understand what's going through his mind if Howard Blum has a good pulse on Steve Goncalves, which is very likely he doesn't. But the point being is, if he does, this is why I resonate with the man. Rather, he explained to a friend, so Steve Goncalves explains to a friend, it was in part a new red-hot anger that propelled him forward. He was furious that the trial had been postponed indefinitely. The prosecution's latest cavalier suggestion was that the proceedings should take place when the local high school was not in session to ensure that the anticipated courthouse traffic wouldn't interfere with the school buses. So Steve Goncalves is pissed that the trial is dragging on, that they seem to be dragging their feet. They're more concerned about interrupting school than getting justice for his daughter. I get that. I can resonate with that as well. Steve felt was the draconian gag order, so it was a ridiculous gag order. He felt that the draconian gag order that severely limited what the law enforcement authorities, the lawyers, and the families of the victims could publicly say about the case, that was a problem to him, and that was a problem to me. It was not just that he deemed this a restriction, a violation of his fundamental constitutional rights, rather a paucity of, and that's a big word, of reputable intelligence had created a vacuum that has been filled by rumors, half-truths, and crackpot lies. Now, this is part where I have a little bit of struggle with it. I agree. The gag order did nothing to help this case. Hiding everything in secrecy has done nothing to help this case and has led to a million different theories about what happened because they won't tell us the details that might put some of those theories to rest. Now, what this is kind of suggesting is that, you know, those people who came up with alternate theories are crackpots, that they're just coming up with half-truths and lies, crackpot lies, when in reality, the gag order led us, like Steve Goncalves, to want to know what's going on. What are you hiding? Why is this not out in the open? Why don't we just tell everybody what happened and get our collective minds together? Why are you hiding everything behind a veil of secrecy? So instead of shaming everyone for trying to figure out what's going on and making it sound like something's wrong with us, the public, who want to know what you're hiding and why you won't be forthcoming, instead of acting like we're the ones who should be ashamed of ourselves for wanting the details, how about not making everything hidden behind a cloak of secrecy? How about not trying to pretend like the family doesn't have the right to investigate their own daughter's death and find out for themselves whether or not law enforcement is looking in the right places? Why is that anything that's wrong? There you go. Steve needed answers, not rumors. And he was sedulous. He remained determined to make sure the authorities had arrested the right man. Oh my gosh, you mean Steve might want to actually make sure they get the right guy? Many people in America, here goes another rant, many people in America would just idly sit by and say, I will wait, thank you very much, until they prove Kohberger did it. Because I knew 15 seconds into this case, Kohberger did it. They told me he did it. And now I'm just waiting for them to tell me definitively that he did it. I know he did it. They told me so in 15 seconds. So I will wait until they tell me it's done. And then I will go to bed at night going, devil's advocates, I feel super great. Just like I knew 15 seconds in, Kohberger's the guy. They told me so 15 seconds in. Doesn't fucking sit well for Steve. Doesn't sit well for me. Sorry, there's so many F-bombs. It's a hot, emotional mess, this whole case. All right. So he wants to make sure, Steve Goncalves, that they got the right man. So again, Steve Goncalves has multiple times said he's willing to accept that Kohberger might not be the guy, or more accurately, I would say, he might not be the only guy. That's the part. That's the key, people. Whether or not Kohberger is the right guy, Steve just wants the right guy. And at some point, Steve seems to have become convinced that Kohberger was the right guy, but maybe not the only guy. And I think that is sitting on his mind about the whole no trial and continued gag order, is who still is involved in this, who get to walk scot-free. Who are we possibly celebrating on the streets saying that they're heroes when they might have been involved? That's the big thing that bothers everybody. This, not everybody, people like me. All right. This he confided to a friend. Steve Goncalves, confided to a friend that he had reached out in his despair was a large part of what kept him up at night, staring sleepless at the ceiling. For while he had grown increasingly convinced that Kohberger was involved, he had become increasingly convinced that Kohberger was involved, not solely. He originally wasn't sure they got the right guy. He increasingly became convinced because of what he's being told. And you'll see the shocker of why Brian Kohberger, or why Steve Goncalves believes Kohberger is the guy, because he was being told so by law enforcement insiders. That's made clear in this. Steve was told over and over again by law enforcement insiders, people with real credentials, that Kohberger was the guy, and he began to believe them. He must be the guy. I've got good inside intel from the FBI telling me Kohberger is the guy, so he became convinced it is the guy. But while he had become increasingly convinced that Kohberger was involved in the crime, Steve remained open to the possibility, he had explained, that there was more perpetrators in the house on King Road on the night his daughter and his friends were killed. Holy shit! Steve Goncalves also feels that, or at least felt, that there may have been more people involved. I still wonder whether Steve believes that there's more people involved. And if there are more people involved, I want them all. I want them all brought to justice. Not one, all of them. Because I'm sick at the idea that you in America, some of you, not you watching this channel, I say this all the time, not you watching this channel, because if you're watching this channel and listening to my rants and haven't shut me off already, you're open-minded and you aren't thinking this way. But the people who think that it's okay to just get one person for it and not everybody else, that's a problem. I want everyone to go down for this. Everyone. And if Brian Kohberger isn't the guy, I definitely want that reversed. But if he is the guy, it's not good enough to start with Brian. I want everyone involved in this to be taken down. Now, and with this possibility, a new dread took hold, a rising consternation that if he waited passively for the cops finally to share what they had managed to uncover, it might be too late. The remaining unidentified perpetrators, if they did indeed exist, would have escaped. Steve Goncalves was basically saying, I am not going to freaking sit by and let the feds tell me and the government tell me and the authorities tell me and the prosecution tell me what happened that night, because I believe there may be other people involved, and why they're stymieing me and hiding everything behind a wall of secrecy and making it unprecedented gag order. I'll hire my own investigator and I'm going to look into finding out the answers, because I don't trust you. And at the end of the day, America, I don't trust law enforcement, prosecution, and our judicial system. That's the entire purpose of my channel. I am critical of mainstream media, I am critical of law enforcement, and I'm critical of the judicial system. There are plenty of people who are amazing in all three of those industries. But as a large part, these societies, mainstream media, law enforcement, judicial system, have corruption in them. And when that corruption tells you, just sit by, we'll tell you what everything happened, just trust us, wink, wink, nod, nod, you can go pack sand. We should have more transparency. We should ask questions of authorities. We should stop having sheeple mentality that they'll tell us what happened. And thank God Steve Goncalves didn't have that attitude. Now, if he is rested at night and he decides that he's done looking at alternative perpetrators, then so be it. But if he's still looking, I'm still looking. So anyways, early on, for a cruel example, an enticing tip came his way. Early on, for a cruel example. Now, this is talking about some things that went bad for Goncalves, but it shows you how far Goncalves was going to go against law enforcement and their investigation. He was not going to sit idly by while somebody tells him what to believe about his daughter's death. Early on, for a cruel example, an enticing tip came his way from a source he described in a text sent to a friend as a jailhouse snitch. It was a convict's tale, something supposedly overheard in a prison yard that offered to tie up all the loose ends of the case. Spurred on by that promise, both Steve and his private detective that he had hired fanned out with their inquiries into several states. So he's hiring a private investigator all over the country, going around trying to follow down leads of a prison leak that came in that said, hey, I heard Kohberger say something. I know what happened that night. And Steve Goncalves, for F's sake, has to pay money to have somebody go hunt down these things, which end up, according to this, to not be true, wasting his money. Some people will do that investigation for free. Now, they may not be as good about it, and they may not be licensed to be a private investigator. So then you're stymied about what you can do. That's a whole side tangent. Anyways, point being, Steve was energized by the possibility that he was on the verge of accomplishing what the professionals had failed to do. Oh, Steve Goncalves thinks that maybe him and his private investigator asking the right questions might get to better answers than law enforcement and the feds. Again, to those of you who think that the feds always get it right, that law enforcement always gets it right, how come Steve Goncalves doesn't feel the same way, that he has to hire a private investigator because he believes the feds and law enforcement aren't going to get it right, that maybe they're incompetent, or maybe that they're hiding something behind the gag order? That is clear. But after an exhausting, time-consuming probe, it was clear that it had been nothing more than an elaborate con, a malicious scheme to squeeze some money out of a grieving family's misery. The experience was demoralizing. So somebody who came forward with this story, apparently, what it sounds like, wanted to have money. Well, I could tell you more, but you're going to have to pay me. You're really close to figuring it out. I got the key piece of information. All it's going to cost you is a little money. And so it became a con. They realized that, again, there are people out there like myself who will do this shit for free. I don't need you to pay me money. If I've got something, I will break the effing story. You don't have to pay me shit. I will, because I want justice. I don't need to be paid for what I know. Hopefully you out there, whoever's sitting on information, because I know there's somebody out there sitting on information, can get over your need to be paid for your information and just do what's right. That would be my appeal to you today. If you're sitting on information, come forward and quit waiting for a payday. For frick's sake, be better than that. I realize in America, everybody wants to make their payday, but this is bigger than your payday. A grainy light bulb cam. This was another example of the Goncalves being led astray. A grainy light bulb cam video of the King Road neighborhood came his way that proved that Kohberger wasn't the lone killer. Proved that he wasn't the lone killer. So he got a video from somebody. It was only after he went to considerable expense and hired a professional videographer to examine the recording that he conceded it was a fake. So again, people have videos all over the place. Everybody's got all these, but we got this video footage of this, we got this video footage of this, and here you can see this, and here you can hear this. And people have been faking and manipulating videos for fame and for money since this case began. Now, we don't know if the person that Goncalves hired who told him, now that's a fake. We don't even know if that's true. He could have been duped by somebody who's on the inside covering up the story. It could have indeed been the truth. All right, continuing on after I got a phone call that interrupted me. So then it talks about Steve leaking a video. Then there was his decision to leak a time-stamped video of another vehicle tearing away from the street adjacent to the murder house just before dawn on the morning of November 13th to one of the true crime internet sites. So Steve Goncalves is going out to true crimers on YouTube, if you will, and giving them leaked video footage that he has uncovered, maybe through his investigator or whatever the case may be, but he gets information. People are filtering stuff to Steve. He's going to YouTubers and giving it to them people. You never know, for example, when you're dealing with a YouTuber and watching your channel, if we or somebody is on the inside and has information from a Steve Goncalves giving them, hey, this is stuff that happened, leak this out and tell people you don't know where you got it. You don't know that that's not happening, which makes these kind of stories interesting. And again, people will try to shame YouTubers, but sometimes those YouTubers are breaking the story because they literally are behind the scenes and getting inside good information, sometimes not good. Just like law enforcement sometimes gets good information and sometimes gets bad information, but we'll shame YouTubers and we don't shame law enforcement in general, which is funny because they also can get misled by false leads. But apparently that shit only falls on YouTubers. Anyways, his logic was that if it was, his logic was about leaking this video. His logic was that it was very possibly significant evidence. It needed widespread scrutiny. So Steve Goncalves put a video out there. He's not sure if it's legit or not, but he puts it out. He leaks it to a YouTuber or whatnot, an internet true crime sleuther, leaks it to somebody and says, put it out there and let people like Devil's Advocates and Pob and Harsh Reality and Murder Metal Mayhem and Birdie Bombshell, let those people tear that video apart and tell me what they see. Maybe Steve Goncalves actually gives a shit to listen to people's opinions, and maybe he doesn't think we're all a bunch of jackasses, even though the media wants to shame YouTubers as we should stay the hell out of it, because that's where Steve was going, is YouTubers, finding people who are going to do the research that perhaps law enforcement isn't doing. But this video, too, was ultimately deemed irrelevant, and in the end, a tangential role in its dissemination became an embarrassment. So the question, though, becomes is, who deemed it irrelevant? Did law enforcement deem it irrelevant? Because again, what it was is it was another vehicle that could have been a perpetrator, an alt perpetrator's vehicle that was seen speeding away. Steve leaks that, and ultimately they say there are no alternate suspects, therefore that's not what you saw on the video. Is that as far as it went? Now, I don't think, listening to what Steve's mindset is, he's going to accept a simple answer like that. So maybe there was a deeper answer than that. But I don't think Steve's just going to accept, hey, don't worry, we know it's one guy, so that video is irrelevant. That's probably not going to be good enough for Steve. It must have been something more, we can only conclude. Now, theories suggesting that a drug ring This is another big thing, the drug ring thing. Now, according to Steve Goncalves, it does not make Steve Goncalves the authority on the matter. So keep in mind, when I poo-poo the drug idea in this book, it's because Steve Goncalves is poo-pooing the drug idea for his own reasons. I'm just sharing that information. So for those of you who believe it is a drug hit and it may be involved with drugs, just pay attention. This is Steve Goncalves' opinion, and also a little bit why I have stayed out of it for some of the same reasons, because again, I say there's a lot of similarities between Steve Goncalves' logic and mine, it feels like. And again, at the end of the day, he may say, pack sand, I'm going to punch that MFer in the face if I ever see devil's advocates. But for what I will say is there's a lot of similarities in the way that we think, that I see. So theories suggesting that a drug ring had been involved were ridiculous. No pro was going to rough up someone not knowing who all is in the house. He texted one of the new Confederates that he had befriended while looking for knowledgeable allies on the internet. Now, I believe I know who. I think I know who Steve Goncalves was texting. I've seen the text messages between him and this TikTok / YouTuber. I know where those text messages, I've seen them. It's the ones that people tell me, by the way, those aren't real. They've been discredited. I don't think they were discredited at all. I think those are legitimate text messages. I got the full text back and forth between that person and Steve. And I think it's totally legit. And Howard Blum is covering the same text messages that I believe I've seen and I have a copy of. So, explain to me, this is what he said in those text messages that I read. Explain to me how a hitman missed Ethan and Kaylee's new car. A professional, he argued, would have been daunted by the presence of 2 additional people in the house. So a hitman's not going to come there and not notice that the house is full of people that are not the intended victims if it was a hit. It doesn't make sense to Steve nor to myself. Anyways. As for now, I'm not saying that it wasn't a drug hit. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying I had questions about it as well. Let me clarify that. I'm not saying that I've ruled out the possibility of a drug hit or a retaliation for somebody going to prison over drugs. I'm not saying that that's not the case. I'm saying that I had the same kind of questions, and this is why I shied away a little bit from the drug hit idea, among other things, in the early stages. As for the rumors of a drug deal gone bad, being the underlying motive, Steve considered it a non-starter. Although the complete autopsy had not been released, he had been told by the authorities that the toxicity reports on all 4 of the victims established that they had no drugs in their system. So in other words, the girls and Ethan didn't have drugs in their system, so therefore it probably wasn't something related to drugs because they weren't doing drugs. That's the logic. And I don't know if that's great logic. It doesn't mean that they couldn't have been buying drugs for another day, or that they had bought drugs for a previous party. Just because they didn't have drugs in their system that night, allegedly, because nobody's seen the toxicology report, allegedly, doesn't necessarily rule that out. And Steve goes to the idea of the kids could just buy weed down the street. True. While weed may have been easy to get, the rumors around the drug are not weed. It's more like fentanyl. It's more like meth. It's more like hard drugs. It's even cocaine or fentanyl laced cocaine. It's not the pot store down the street. So while Steve Goncalves is like, if they wanted drugs, they could just go to the pot store. Maybe that's a little bit of a misnomer on his part, that the only drugs people do is weed. But again, the kids didn't have toxicology reports showing that they had drugs in their system. So were they doing hard drugs? I doubt it. But anyways. And then too, there's some crazy ass people who are really crazy who were trying to elbow their way into the case with deliberate misinformation. Let me assure you right now, the big YouTubers, in my opinion, who cover these cases are not deliberately trying to mislead anyone. Every person that I know who's got a decent handle on this and is respected in the community are doing it because they honestly believe those questions are legit. Nobody's doing it to make money. Nobody's doing it to mislead people deliberately. There are legitimate questions. So screw anyone like a Howard Blum who wants to discredit YouTubers as deliberately trying to deceive the public. Most of the people who are in the true crime sphere are not deliberately trying to mislead the public. But not all of Steve's investigation efforts have been in vain. He had assembled some blue chip sources. Here we go, people. Listen to this. Not all of Steve's investigative efforts have been in vain. He had assembled some blue chip sources that he revealed to several friends, included an FBI agent in the St. Louis office, who had shared his personal email so that his boss in the bureau wouldn't learn that he was communicating with Steve. The FBI there it is, people. Dateline NBC. Somebody in law enforcement, former or current, or in the prosecution, is leaking information about this case. Here you have in Howard Blum's book, Steve Goncalves has an FBI informant who's leaking information to him illegally behind the scenes, and contrary to the gag order, leaking information to Steve Goncalves and taking steps to make sure that that connection of him leaking information to Steve Goncalves is kept secret. That should be a problem for all of you people. Because again, how much does Steve Goncalves become convinced by his inside FBI agent that they got the right guy, and eventually became convinced that it's true because his insider source, who he trusts, who's taking his own risk of his own career to leak stuff to Steve Goncalves, he trusts this guy. Why wouldn't he? That he says they got the right guy. Maybe that's how Steve became convinced it's the right guy or the only guy. Now, here it continues. It's not just the FBI who's leaking information to Steve. That's the shocker of this book. Not only is Howard Blum was saying the FBI, he all but names the guy. It's an FBI agent in the St. Louis office who's sharing information with Steve Goncalves. It's pretty close to naming a name. And then it says, but that's not it. A handful of additional sympathetic law enforcement officers, and most helpful of all, a conduit to 2 grand jurors who had been on the panel that had voted to indict Bryan Kohberger. Listen, people, right there, it tells you everything you need to know. Insiders in the FBI were leaking information to Steve. No wonder Steve's out there sharing everything with the public, because they're getting information to the public through Steve Goncalves. It is illegal for them to go and tell the public about it, but they can go to Steve and then protect Steve's protected constitutional right to be able to have freedom of speech to talk about what happened to his daughter. He can leak information from insider sources, FBI, law enforcement, people who were privy to the judicial system and the grand jury testimony. Grand juries are convened in secret, ladies and gentlemen. They're done in private. So Steve Goncalves has an FBI agent leaking information to him, according to Howard Blum. He has several, a handful, it says, of sympathetic law enforcement officers, likely in Moscow Police Department, who are sympathetic to Steve Goncalves. And I freaking understand being sympathetic to Steve Goncalves. He lost his daughter. He's a hurting man. We will want to give him comfort. We want to give him peace. So if you are in the law enforcement, you're like, man, we're gonna take care of this. We're gonna find your daughter's killer. Trust us. And those are sympathetic people to Steve. In the end, that sounds noble and great, except for they're leaking illegally information against the court's order, against the gag order, information to the family, Steve Goncalves. And then Steve blabs it to the media, and then the media gets a hold of it. And eventually Hitler's like, shut this whole shit down. Who in law enforcement is leaking information to Goncalves? I would argue, who the fuck's not leaking information to the Goncalves family? FBI's leaking information to the Goncalves family. A handful of people within law enforcement are leaking information to the Goncalves family. And somebody who's privy to the secret grand jury told Steve Goncalves what grand jurors were thinking. And by the way, again, that's part of that testimony that many people tell you, oh, Mr. Devil's Advocate, that's been completely discredited. Steve Goncalves did not talk to somebody who had contacts within the grand jury. Yeah, no, I think he did. We've seen the text messages. And he said the grand jury didn't believe Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk's testimony. The grand jurors believed that Dylan Mortensen and Bethany should be investigated, perhaps even brought up on criminal charges. Holy shit. And Howard Blum was basically admitting that that's the case. Steve Goncalves had somebody who had been in the courtroom with the grand jurors, or at least had interviewed the grand jurors afterwards, gotten inside information from grand jurors who were inside that information. And guess what they said? Bethany and Dylan should be investigated. There was the jurors, the grand jury did not believe at all those girls' story. But yet you're going to hear in the days to come, by the way, you're going to hear an explanation why everything that the girls did was perfectly legitimate. There was no questions. Well, the freaking grand jury thought there was problems, and Steve Goncalves was made aware of it. Steve knew the grand jury had problems with the girls' testimony. This whole case stinks to high heaven. And in the process, he had compiled some startling revelations. Steve Goncalves had, in his process of investigation, had compiled some startling revelations, hard-won information that he triumphantly disclosed to his newfound internet associates. So Goncalves is going on the internet to the Drunk Turkey Show, to Brett Norton, to various YouTubers, and he's sharing the leaked information from insiders, FBI, law enforcement, and grand jury testimony, leaking it to YouTubers and getting it out there on the internet. And then America shits on YouTubers for butting in where they don't belong. But the information is coming from law enforcement themselves. So keep that in mind. One of the new shocking pieces of information that has come out recently, and it's in the book here, Kohberger had purchased a dark blue Dickies long-sleeved work uniform at a Walmart in Pullman, Washington, not long before the murders, Steve had learned. Authorities had a copy of the $49.99 receipt that they also now had a theory to explain how Kohberger had managed to escape from the crime scene without a scratch and without leaving an incriminating drop of blood in his getaway car or his apartment. He had worn the work uniform during the murders and then had disrobed before he got behind the wheel of his Hyundai Elantra for his circuitous drive back to the apartment. There are problems still. Let me point them out to you. There are problems still with this freaking scenario. Perhaps the authorities hypothesized that he had stuffed his work suit into a plastic garbage bag and then shoved it into his trunk. Well, Steve Goncalves actually has a text message, that same one that Howard Blum is basically alluding to all throughout this chapter, saying, don't you remember Bethany Funk saw somebody getting it out, putting clothes into a garbage bag in the kitchen and leaving in his underwear? Bethany Funk supposedly saw that, according to text messages, which many of you tell me has been completely discredited, that that's not true. It was never true. Yet Howard Blum again is talking about how it's possible that the killer wore this thing and put his clothes into a garbage bag in the house. Because again, if he didn't do it inside the house, he would have tracked blood outside of the house. There was no blood outside of the house other than the blood leaking down the walls. But there wasn't blood going out the driveway. So he didn't change out of his clothes. The killer or killers, let me say that, or killers, didn't change out of his or their clothes out in the driveway because no blood got out the driveway. So it had to have been done inside the house. And an indication is Bethany Funk saw a man in his underwear. And here's the kicker. I've told you before. I think the reason why Bethany Funk was fighting getting back into court and they didn't want her on the stand is because who Bethany saw wasn't Bryan Kohberger. That's my $1 million thing. I don't think Bethany Funk saw Bryan Kohberger. I think if she was going to testify about what she saw, and if she had to explain that she saw somebody in the house, if it was a description like he was bald, he had a goatee, he was black, if she had anything that ruled out Bryan Kohberger, the case would be fucked. Because it wouldn't be Brian. The narrative has to be Bryan Kohberger and Bryan Kohberger alone. So if Bethany Funk didn't see Bryan Kohberger at the back door, or if she saw somebody she recognized that she knew, and she's terrified to testify against somebody that knows that she saw them and they saw her, and she's afraid of her life, well, if she ever says, hey, guess what? I saw named so-and-so that has been to that house many times. I know it was so-and-so that I saw at the back door, the whole case would be destroyed. This is why you're never going to hear. It's going to be sealed. That's why you're never going to have Bethany Funk on the stand, because what she saw and what she knows, I think, would blow the entire case. It's why a plea deal came out, because they could not risk her getting subpoenaed. Because if the defense subpoenaed Bethany and she saw somebody other than Bryan Kohberger, the case was over. They had to make a deal and get this off the table, because the defense was going to subpoena her. And then it comes down to Bethany. Is she going to perjure herself on the stand and lie? And how far will law enforcement go to cover up the story? Hear me out. If law enforcement took a statement from Bethany Funk in the early hours of that crime, and she indicated seeing somebody at the back window getting out of their clothes, putting it in a garbage bag and leaving in underwear, and if that person's in that description didn't match Kohberger, how far will law enforcement go to get their guy? Would they delete her testimony? Because if they delete her testimony, then even if you subpoena Bethany, the defense would be like, well, let's go look at the police records. Oh, guess what? No police records exist anymore about what Bethany saw. That would be a big, huge red flag. How far would they go to cover that up? Would they allow Bethany Funk to get on there and say, by the way, we pulled the police reports from that night. Did you not tell Officer so-and-so that you saw a man standing in underwear at the back of the thing and that he had a goatee, or he was black, or he doesn't match Bryan Kohberger's description? That was never going to be allowed to be on the stand. So it'd either be deleted by law enforcement in their well-meaning desire to make sure Bryan Kohberger goes down, so they'll just make sure that somebody loses that police report because it can't be brought up on the stand. They would screw their case. Or it couldn't be deleted. Chain of custody has already protected it. It can't be deleted. So the next best thing is don't have a trial. Don't have her on the stand. Because if she goes on the stand, that's going to come out. And it's too late to delete it. So I know I'm on a long rant, but I want to make sure you understand what I'm saying. I want to make sure you're clear. There's a scenario in which the reason why this didn't go to trial is because they couldn't cover up that there's exculpatory information that proves Kohberger didn't do it alone, maybe didn't do it at all. And if they can't cover it up, because they would cover it up if they can. If they can't cover it up, the only other option is don't let it go to trial. It's even more disturbing, or even more troubling, if true, was that Steve had learned from people who had spoken to members of the grand jury who had been presented with the prosecution's case. It centered on the alleged behavior of two of the roommates who had miraculously survived the nights unscathed, Dylan and Bethany. How He had long wondered, could they have slept blissfully unaware in the aftermath of a savage pre-dawn stabbing murder of 4 of their friends in a narrow house with paper-thin walls? The story is bullshit. Steve Goncalves knows it's bullshit. I know it's bullshit. Anyone in the true crime community knows it's bullshit. And yet America will still believe that somehow Dylan could hear a near whispered, there's somebody here, or don't worry, I'm here to help you, but can't hear Kaylee Goncalves fighting like a tiger, screaming as she's being attacked upstairs. Can't hear Xana fighting and putting up one hell of a fight in the room right beside her. She can't hear any of that. Those must have been silent attacks, completely silent. The girls were fighting back with their mouths shut. But she can hear, don't worry, I'm here to help you. Fuck you, that story makes no sense. You know it makes no sense. Anyways. Now he had an answer, perhaps. Steve had been told that the 2 survivors allegedly had not only been awake. Steve finds out he had been told that the survivors allegedly had not only been awake while the killings had taken place, but that they had heard everything. Steve Goncalves has been told by some insider the girls were awake during the entire killing and they heard everything. More astonishingly, his grand jury sources, Steve Goncalves has grand jury sources, somebody's told him what the grand jury heard and saw, alleged that the 2 girls had been texting each other as the murder methodically went from one room to the next. The girls were texting each other during the murders as the killers are going from room to room. They're texting each other. That came out in grand jury. The grand jury is a secret investigation, ladies and gentlemen. It's outside the public eye. The grand jury somebody leaked information to Steve Goncalves that the grand jury heard the girls were texting about the murders while the murders were going on. Why do you guys, and again, not you. If you're watching this video, you're on my side. Why, America, do you shame me like I'm some kind of asshole when Steve Goncalves has been told the grand jurors knew that the girls knew the murders were going on? They knew. I know they knew. They had to have known. There's no way in hell anyone in their right mind can think that Dylan can hear, I'm here to help you, but can't hear screams. They knew, and the girls were texting during the murders, which means, if you're not making the connection, which means those girls knew what was going on. Did they bring that person into the house? Did they allow the person into the house? Were they part of the whole story? If they are, and if Kohberger's the guy, how are those girls related to Kohberger? We need to know. How does Dylan know Kohberger? If Kohberger's the only guy who did it, and Dylan's just keeping her mouth shut while her friends are being murdered and texting Bethany while the murders are happening, and she knows it's going down, what is her connection to Brian Kohberger? Are you going to let her walk, people? Are you going to celebrate her as the poor little scared kitten who was just too afraid and couldn't say anything because she was terrified? Are you going to continue to celebrate that shit and say that I'm victim shaming when you know for fucking logic tells you she was awake during the killings? She heard the whole thing. So did she know the killer or killers? Did Bethany know the killer or the killers? Was it even Brian Kohberger that Bethany saw at the back of the door? Is that why she can't go to the stand? She can't talk on the stand because she knows it wasn't Brian Kohberger that she saw. Something in that case is absolutely exculpatory, and it will destroy the case, and they know it. That's my rant. Holy shit, I'm going to need a break. The possibility that 2 people had a sense of the horror while it occurred and had not acted, calling neither friends nor 911, left Steve floored. No less confounding, they had, if his sources were as knowledgeable as he believed, then let hour after hour after hour tick away before they finally decided to summon friends. Not 911, they called friends. It added an entirely new brand of mystery to a crime that was encircled by so many unanswered questions. I would argue to you people, this is why, in my opinion, this is why Steve Goncalves is pissed off there was no trial. Because there are people who are going to walk from this, who were involved. There is no way that makes any sense to Steve Goncalves why those girls would text each other while the murders are happening, lie about what happened, and then call friends, not 911. They know their friends were murdered. Are they friends? Were they really friends? There's all kinds of allegations. Dylan didn't even like Maddie. She didn't like Kaylee, or in particular, Kaylee. So were they really friends? Did they get lured back to the house? I've got tons of videos talking about how I think that they got lured back to the house. Steve Goncalves, in my opinion, according to Howard Blum, suggests that those girls were involved. Is Steve okay? Is Steve okay with just Brian Kohberger going down? Or would he like everyone that helped lure people into the house to kill his daughter go down for it? I would argue the latter. In the aftermath of this startling intelligence, Steve felt that he had no choice but to intensify his efforts. And in that dogged process, he came to believe that the government must have protected a source, must have a protective source, an informant who could provide testimony that would tighten the screws that held together the case against Kohberger. Steve was determined to talk to this individual. Steve believes that the government is protecting an insider who knows what's going on. Bethany Funk would be a great insider. If Bethany Funk saw something that night and knows what happened, Bethany Funk would be a great protected resource by the government. The federal government, the FBI, protecting Bethany at all ends to make sure Bethany doesn't ever have to reveal what she really saw that night, because it would screw the case, which is one guy did it and it's not the guy Bethany saw, in my opinion. And Steve did not want to wait for the distant trial to get the knowledge he needed. And now Steve doesn't get to know what happened. Forever, that protected informant will never have to come forward about what they saw. Maybe she saw. Never. And if I were Steve, I'd be hot about that. And all the press is like, he's hot because they didn't kill Kohberger. Is it he's hot because they didn't kill Kohberger? Or is it he's hot because we will never get to the bottom of who knew more, and they're being covered up and protected by the government? And after some digging, he grew convinced that he had the informant in his sight. So Steve Goncalves thinks there's an informant. He's going after the informant. Guess what the FBI does? Shut Steve down. Don't you dare look for our informant. That is protected information. They are protected. Don't you dare, Steve. I will have your ass arrested if you try to hamper with a protected informant. Listen to Howard Blum, and whether you believe it's true or not, just listen to what he has to say. Before he could make his move, Steve Goncalves, before he could get in a room and have a heart-to-heart talk with the witness, Steve Goncalves knows this witness and he wants to talk to them. He's got the witness in his sight. He thinks he knows who the government's protecting, and he wants to sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk with them. And he was unexpectedly stopped in his tracks by the FBI. Don't you talk to this person. Don't you dare. So Steve's like, hey, this witness has some explaining to do. I want to hear their story. And the FBI rushes in and says, Steve, don't you dare talk to that witness. Don't you dare. The Bureau, Steve informed people, had sent an official letter to his attorney in Moscow, Shannon Gray, warning that if there were any attempts to contact the individual Steve had been pursuing, there would be legal consequences. The witness had originally reached out to the authorities through a tip line that promised to protect the identities of anyone volunteering information. So let's break down a scenario. I'm not saying this is the scenario. Let's break down a scenario. Let's say Bethany Funk saw something that night and shut her mouth for a while. She's terrified. Everything's happening in the moment. She's scared shitless. But in time, she starts to grow a conscience. Maybe it was a day later. Maybe it was 2 days later. She calls a informant tip line. I think I know what happened. I saw something that night, and I've been terrified to say something, but I need protection. Great. If you can help us break this case, we'll protect you. So what did you see? After she or whoever gets confirmation that she'll be protected, their testimony, here's what I saw. It wasn't Brian Kohberger, or it was this, or whatever. And Steve finds out that person exists with information, with information that'll break the case. And the FBI says, don't you dare try to reach out to the person that we're protecting. Somebody does have information, and we will not let you talk to them. We'll arrest you if you do. So they sent out a letter reminding them that this was a protected person. If anyone volunteering information, the Bureau had to honor their commitment. Furthermore, the letter made it clear with an intimidating fixity the fact that Steve was the father of one of the victims gave him no dispensation from the legal consequences that accompany tampering with a government witness. There is a government witness being protected by the government, and they warned Steve Goncalves, I don't care if it's your daughter or not, you are not allowed to contact our protected informant. Who is that protected informant? What do they know? And would it exonerate Brian Kohberger, or would it prove that somebody else was involved? And if I were Steve Goncalves and I knew that there was a witness to the thing who was maybe culpable in it, maybe helped out with the crime, and that the government is just going to cover it up and lie and hide and protect them and say, hey, you know what? We're never going to talk about what that person knows. And Steve knows what they know. And he just wants to have a heart-to-heart, hear it from themselves, to put this shit to bed. But they're like, you won't do such a thing, Steve. We'll arrest you. We got our guy. Stymied, Steve sulked away. The promise of a real understanding was out there, and yet still beyond his grasp. Racked by frustration and despair, all he could do was send a disheartened text to one of his fellow internet detectives. There's so much more to this than in the media. That I also believe I've seen that text message. So I believe I know who Steve Goncalves sent that to. He's stymied. The government won't even let him talk to the protected informant who knows what happened that night. If I were Steve, I'd be mad that what's happening in the courtroom isn't the full story. And I'd be mad. I want the whole story. I want everyone to pay. If he cannot conduct the investigation, that's Steve Goncalves, he feels he must, then he will at least ensure that at some distant appointed time, there will be a measure of justice. Steve Goncalves may be going out to every single YouTuber out there that will listen to try to investigate because the government won't investigate it. In fact, the government is taking steps to hide what really happened that night. That's my take on that. The Idaho State Legislature Bill 186 passed last March after Kohberger's indictment affirmed that if the chemicals required after an intravenous injection were unavailable, a death sentence could be fully fulfilled by a firing squad. So it's just an afterthought. They want to make sure that they kill the guy. Now, here's the epilogue, which has, I'm going to be brief on it because it just makes you a little bit nauseous. It's Howard Blum's, this is what happened, and it's all Kohberger, and here's the reason why it happened. So one thing is to note, this highlight, the University of Idaho ordered that the murder house on King Road be demolished, only to learn that the bulldozers cannot eradicate the past. Even the murder house has been destroyed. The university gave the order and it was swiftly leveled to the ground. Not a trace of it remains. A flat, dark tract has replaced it. And the trial? Postponed. And then postponed again. And now, by the way, not even going to happen. The trial's never going to happen. 2.5 years later, postponed. And now let's just not have that trial. Let's just not get to the bottom of what really happened. It's not important. Destroy the house, protect the government informant, don't talk about it. It's done. Plea deal, done. We're not going to talk about who covered anything up. No. Screw you guys. We're going home. And so now, after all the tedious, exasperating delays, whenever it finally does take place, and it won't, this was written before Brian took the deal, whenever it does take place, it won't, it'll never happen. It will be a footnote to the larger events. I don't know why I'm struggling with that word and why I'm dropping so many F-bombs. The damage has already been done. Yeah, the trial will never happen, Steve. You're never going to get that justice, man. Unless you, yeah. Brian Kohberger was, I believe, the murderer. So this is it. This is going to wrap up. This is Howard Blum. Here's his theory. Brian Kohberger was, I believe, the murderer. I also believe his target was Maddie Mogen and her alone. If he had been simply intent on killing everyone in the house, he would have started the savagery on the second floor. That's his logic. Because the killer went up to Maddie's room, that means she was the target and no one else. Otherwise, he would have started on the main floor. He also had no knowledge that Kaylee had returned for the weekend to show off her new car, or that he would find her in Maddie's bedroom. So that was a surprise. She's collateral damage. And he only encountered Ethan after he had descended to the second floor. Yet once Xana overheard the encounter and spoke up, she too was doomed. Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan, they were all grim collateral damage. The only person he came for that night was Maddie, according to Blum. The killer needed to escape, and they were in his way. But what about Dylan? That was the first question I asked. If that's the case, then what about Dylan? So here's Blum's logic. How does one explain her passive behavior as well as the killer's decision to spare her life? I think the only reasonable explanation is one that defies commonplace reason. Well, thank God at least Howard Blum has the balls to say, what I'm going to tell you makes no sense. That's the universal translator, what he just said. I think the only reasonable explanation is one that defies common reason. In other words, it makes no fucking sense. They both were in parallel states of shock, both locked so tight into their own private worlds, a young girl's terror, a killer's mania, that they could not see beyond the moment that they were living through at the time. So Kohberger just was in a trance. She was frozen shock state. They didn't even really see each other as they passed as two ships in the night. Yet she can tell you exactly what he looked like, his height, his build, his weight, and the bushy eyebrows. But they didn't see each other because they were in frozen shock and just in their own little world. A scenario that involved multiple assailants would have left more DNA evidence. So that's Blum's also theory. If there had been multiple people in the house, we would have had more DNA. That's his logic. Other cars would have been captured on the surveillance videos, leaving the scene of the crime. Well, other cars were seen on the surveillance video and just were ruled out. But were they ruled out because logic like Hitler came in? Well, we know the killer arrived in a white Elantra. That black SUV leaving the scene isn't a white Elantra, so therefore it can't be involved in the case. If that's your logic, then you apparently don't see where your fucking logic broke down. And by the way, so other cell phones would have been recorded pinging up the nearby towers. Not Howard Blum, if you're narrow focused. If you have decided who the killer is, you don't look at other people's cell phones. You don't care to look at the other cell phones and whether they're pinging off and making a case against other people, because you already know who did it. In a narrow focus investigation, when police have decided who the killer is, that's all they look at. Just like it was stated earlier, when there was unknown male B and male D DNA in the house that didn't belong to the killer, they didn't look into it because it didn't belong to the killer. If it belonged to Kohberger, they would have looked into it, but it didn't. So we know it wasn't the killer because we know the killer is Brian Kohberger, which is why we didn't look in. Do you not see the problem with this whole case? Narrow focused. We know who did it already. It's Brian Kohberger with the candlestick in the courtyard. Whatever. I'm trying to make a Clue reference. You already decided who the killer is. You've already made the big reveal. So you're not going to look at other cell phone records. You're not going to look at other things because you don't need to. You already know it can't be other people because you know who did it. And by now, another straightforward and paradoxically more reasonable motive would have leaked and been taking shape. So according to Howard Blum, the only thing that makes sense is an incel who can't get laid and is obsessed with Maddie. That makes total sense. Anything else would have come forward by now as a more plausible thing, like half a dozen other things that are way more plausible than the incel who just can't get laid. It happened, I imagine, like this. Kohberger had crossed paths with Maddie, most likely at the Mad Greek restaurant on Main Street in Moscow, which offered the sort of vegan dishes that he preferred and where she was a waitress. Did they talk? Did he ask her out? There's no evidence of any significant interaction. No evidence. I don't even think there's evidence that he'd ever gone to the Mad Greek restaurant, but they don't point that out. But I don't think there's even evidence of that. But this is what must have happened, according to Blum. And I believe one wasn't necessary for her image to take hold of his thoughts. Obsessions came easily to him. He only believed deeply. I suspect that after their initial encounter, however fleeting and slight, he continued to follow her over many nights. And while the roommates hosted party after party at the house on King Road, he was often watching from the shadows. So apparently, in 2 college campuses that Brian Kohberger is going on, only woman who's beautiful enough to become obsessive for him is a girl that he briefly encounters at a Mad Greek restaurant, which we can't prove that ever even happened. It's just, I imagine this is how it happened. And he became obsessed with Maddie because she's the only pretty girl on 2 campuses. What the hell is your logic? There's a million pretty girls on that campus. She's just one pretty girl. But for Howard Blum, he had to have become obsessed because she's so beautiful and he can't have her. I do not believe that he was casing the house on the 3 trips to the neighborhood in the hours after the midnight on November 13th. Each one was, I contend, a killer's journey. Only he could not find the will necessary to step across the barrier. This is where he talked in the earliest part of the book about the killer's working up the nerve. He's driving around. He wants to kill her. He needs to kill her. He wants to kill her. He needs to kill her. But he doesn't want to be that guy. I don't want to cross this line. And I'm compelled. Park, go in, kill. I must. I have to. I can't fight the urge anymore. I must kill. This is what I am. This is the logic Howard Blum wants to say is the only thing that makes sense. Anything else would be preposterous. He was wavering. He needed to become completely convinced that he deserved what he had, and therefore anything was justifiable before he could act. He needed to hear the voices telling him in his head, that's what he's talking about, that he was smarter than everyone else, that he could get away with murder, which is why you take your cell phone and your car to the crime scene and don't think that shit through and go commit the murders in a state that has the death penalty instead of one that doesn't have the death penalty, and yet you think you're getting away with murder. I'm sorry for the enormous rant. I feel like I'm going to be terrified that not very many people are going to hear this because there's so many big bombshells in this episode. This one needs to be watched. This is a huge one. I don't even know how to make sure that it gets the attention it deserves. If you found it entertaining, if you found it worthwhile, please share with other people. Not for my own grandiose, like everybody should listen to me. I'm just saying that out of all my videos that people have loved, this one may not get much traction because it's part of a book review. The book review gets very little traction. This one deserves some traction. Do you not agree? Thanks for listening. That's the end of When the Night Comes Falling by Howard Blum. And now we eagerly await James Patterson's book, which might, I've been told, might have a new bombshell about the planted knife sheath. Dun, dun, dun. Talk to you later.